His mother's deserted him. It's the Foundling Hospital or the workhouse for him now, Dorcas said with a grimace. Poor little mite. I can't believe you're saying that, Ma, Hettie said. You can't turn him out. He's only a bairn. It's not his fault. She stared at her mother. Aye, a bairn with no one to fend for him. Dorcas folded her heavy arms across her chest. His ma's run off and left us in the lurch. Who's going to pay for his keep? That's what I'd like to know. We can't keep him. That's for sure. I can't afford to feed and clothe a growing lad. He'll be out of that cot in no time. Who's going to pay for him then? Hettie drew in a sharp breath. She couldn't believe Dorcas would turn the child out. Not Annie's child. Annie paid well enough for us to look after him before, and she'll make up what she owes. I'm sure of it. Sure of it, are you? Well, why hasn't she been in touch? She's left him, and left you with a baby on your hands, and nowt to pay for him. She's moved on, and she'll not be back. I always knew she was good for nowt. Flighty miss. She took you in good and proper, didn't she? No, workhouse will take him in. Hettie bridled. I'll not see him put in that place as long as I've breath in my body. So, you're going to take him on, are you? Wash him, feed him, buy his clothes. You can't afford that any more than I can. If I can't pay the rent, we'll lose the house. Then it's us as'll be out on the street. Hettie sighed. That was true enough. Their tenancy teetered on a knife edge. She had relied on Annie's money to pay towards the rent, and now, with only one lodger and Dorcas's laundry money coming in, things were tighter than ever. Still, she couldn't see the little mite put out. She had promised Annie. She turned to gaze at the child sleeping in the makeshift cot. She touched his cheek. He stirred in his sleep. He sleeps in my room. I'll see he's no bother. I'll take care of him. Take care of him, will you? One thing when you was getting paid to do it. Different matter now, though. I expect you to do your share around here. I can't afford to pay Sarah extra with nowt coming in. I'll do my share and look after Billy, Hettie said, her face reddening as her defiance mounted. I'll pull my weight, just as I've always done. Dorcas's jaw clenched. She shook her head, but she relented. On your head be it, she said, and stalked off to the kitchen. Hettie stared down at the sleeping baby, his wispy infant curls and long eyelashes dark against his velvet skin. That cute little boy, with his sunny smile and big blue eyes, had stolen her heart from the first moment she saw him. But her mother was right. He needed a lot of minding, as well as food and clothes, and she hadn't heard from Annie for weeks now. She hadn't sent money for his keep either. It wasn't like Annie not to keep in touch. Since she'd moved out, she visited Billy as often as she could, and Hettie had expected her to come home for Christmas. But still, they'd heard nothing. Don't worry, she'll get in touch soon and everything will be all right, she said to the sleeping child. He couldn't hear her, but it made her feel better to say it out loud. Hettie sighed. Was Dorcas right about Annie? Had she moved on and left him behind? If they didn't hear soon, Hettie may be forced to go back to her job at the bakery, and then they'd have to find a place for him, no matter how great the betrayal or how fiercely Hettie fought it. Dorcas had taken Annie and her brother in when their mother died. Money was tighter now, and Dorcas older and perhaps more bitter. Was taking them in something she had come to regret? Hettie wondered what had hardened her heart. Her mind spiralled back to that day so many years ago. A sorry number of people stood shivering around the open grave. Hettie wiped tears from her eyes. tears resulting more from the bitterness of the March wind than from any feelings she had for the deceased. Mary Flanagan was laid to rest with little ceremony. Corrie, her 12-year-old son, threw in a handful of gravel. Her daughter Annie, who was 9, and according to her mother a mistake, tossed in a daffodil. "I hope you're happy now, Ma," she said. Hettie, who was a year older than Annie, squeezed her friend's hand. She barely knew Annie's mother. She'd only met her once, last summer, when she'd taken a bundle of her cast-off clothing along to the house for Annie. When Mrs. Flanagan opened the door, she was wearing nothing but a gaudy silk gown wrapped around her slight body. The house smelled of stale beer, the unpleasant fug of tobacco, and the sweat of the 2 dock workers who occupied the upstairs rooms. Hettie handed the bundle over in exchange for a threepenny bit. Mrs. Flanagan told her to thank her mammy, and Hettie ran all the way home. The pastor nodded to the gravedigger, leaning on his spade nearby, and the task of shovelling earth over the coffin began. Dorcas laid a posy of violets by the grave, Hettie some primroses. There were no other flowers. Back at the house, Dorcas Bundy had sandwiches and cake laid out. She prided herself on the cleanliness of her house and her ability to whip up a good spread from next to nothing. The children tucked into the sandwiches as though they'd not eaten for a week, which was probably quite likely. Dorcas handed the pastor a mug of hot tea. "It's very good of you to take the children in, Mrs. Bundy," he said, picking up a cake. Dorcas huffed, hoisting up her ample bosoms. "Better than leaving it to the parish to feed and house them," she said. Hettie heard the pastor say something about a reward, but he also mentioned heaven, so she guessed it wouldn't be immediately forthcoming. Anyway, Dorcas hadn't been that keen to have them. "They can share my room, there'll be no trouble," Hettie had said as soon as the pastor suggested it. But it was only Annie's persuasive nature, Corrie's promise to pay, and the pastor's assurance that they could pay their way that had opened Dorcas's heart. Annie put her small hand into Dorcas's rough work-hardened one and said, "Please, Mrs. Bundy, please." "We'll pay," Corrie said, his mud-brown eyes glinting, his hands clenched. "We don't want no charity." "And the parish will help if you need anything," the pastor said. It was well known that Dorcas took in lodgers, so to please the pastor she agreed. Mary Flanagan's meagre belongings were sold to pay for the burial, the remainder being given to Dorcas towards the children's keep. Corrie insisted their mother's own mementos, bits of jewellery, letters, photos and personal items, be put into a box as a keepsake for Annie. When Hattie saw it, she thought it a poor legacy for a lifetime.